Dear Lord. Prepare yourselves. Prepare yourselves. Prepare yourselves. This is what Satanism is doing to children. Prepare yourselves. Just look at it. This is a woman. Well, it was before Satan got involved. Good Lord. And, if you want to know what it looked like before that, let me see if I can find a picture that shows you what she used to look like back when she was normal. Let's see. Oh, come on. Where are some normal looking pictures of her? They're like erasing them from the internet. For shit's sake. Because they don't want people to remember how she used to look. That she used to look normal. Here's one. That's how she used to look. I mean, what the hell? Very disturbing. Here's another picture of her looking normal. See, right here, she looked normal and she looked nice. I mean, she was actually a pretty girl. Look at her here. She looked normal. She was actually pretty. And now look at it. That is breasts removed. That's Satan. All right. Let's see. Just before we pass this over to Breaking Spectre, I just want to show you guys that the truth has come out. The big guy used to go with Hunter Biden to the dinners with his shady business partners. So the big guy was there. He was involved in all of the stuff that Hunter was doing. He was benefiting from it. He met with the Ukrainian, Russian, and Kazakhstani business associates of his sons at a dinner in Washington, D.C. while he was vice president. Records on Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop show. So he was there. He was participating in all of that. He knew about it all. They've tried to insulate him from this stuff and claim that he had nothing to do with it, but that's a lie. That's a flat out, bald-faced lie. All right, we're passing it over now to Breaking Spectre. And look, I'm not judging Elliot Page. However, there is such a thing as appropriate judgment of things that are evil, like not to tolerate evil things like mutilation. That is an evil thing. And I'm not going to tolerate pedophiles, right? And I'm also not going to tolerate mutilating a woman's body that God gave her. God made her that way. And I think that mutilating her body and trying to turn her into something she's not is an offense to God and to nature and the natural order of things. Therefore, it is satanic. It's an inversion of reality.
Well, I guess maybe the better question is do you honestly believe these folks actually believe in God, or why else would they be rebelling as much as they are?
Well, that's the thing. I think they do believe in God. And I think that you can see it in their behavior. They're so rabid in their hatred for Christ and their hatred of Christianity and their desire and need to offend God. That, to me, shows you they very much believe in God. They just don't like him. They're very much, they know he exists. And the occultists mock atheists. They call them stupid and vulgar and profane and ignorant.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and obviously for those that are the praying type for these folks, they obviously need our calls for prayer and hope that their eyes be opened, that their ears may be able to hear. obviously, these folks, lest something happens, will go by way of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, that's right. Amen.
Well, I don't know if you recall, but maybe this will jog your memory. Start off a little meme here this evening. Remember when mandatory vaccinations, cashless societies, digital tracking, massive censorship, facial recognition, and microchipping were considered crazy conspiracy theories? Well, maybe now you'll start to listen and pay attention.
Right?
It's all here, folks. It's all here, right now.
Oh my God. Remember when they said the Wuhan lab theory, the lab leak theory was a conspiracy theory, and now here we are.
Yep.
They're no longer censoring that topic after over a year. I mean, that's how ignorant these people are. So it's just very very disturbing.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, that's what we're going to cover here tonight. More of the Wuhan-ness, the CCP virus, some questions, and an interesting article on that penned by a guy who had gotten some New York Times awards. Don't know how far I'll get into it. It's a fairly lengthy article, but more of the shenanigans around all this business. So, yeah, more of the same, I suppose. And of course, the early front runners to all this, you think back to February, March last year when all this stuff was unfolding. There were those of us and various outlets who were reporting a lot of this stuff at the onset and were spot on, Zero Hedge included. They got lambasted and kicked off Twitter as a result. And now here we are a year plus later. And lo and behold, they're proven right yet again.
Yeah, but they're not going to let him back on Twitter.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're back on now. They got reinstated. It took them clear to July of last year before they did.
Wow.
But it was just a quote unquote oversight or mistake, because that's what
I haven't been allowed back.
Yeah, why would anybody want to at this point? We need to be mass emigrating off of those platforms.
Yeah, that's a good point. But just to harass some of these people, this is probably what got me banned, though, was going to all these publications and responding to their dumb tweets.
Yeah, well, yeah. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, it's toxic anyways, though. Twitter is toxic and it curates your news feed. They have all this psychographic and all these different data points on you. They know exactly what to feed you just to keep you in a perpetual stage of a state of anger and outrage and depression. And they're just going to curate everything you see to be awful thing. They'll know exactly what'll rile you up, and that's what they're going to feed you all the time. And then they'll mess with your your dopamine and your serotonin, and that's just not good for you.
Yeah, get on Gab. That's where the cool kids hang out.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, thanks for tuning in this evening. Good to have everybody aboard, folks, as always. And Pinata, good to see you here this evening as well, if you haven't jumped off already.
All right. Yeah, we'll catch you soon.
Take care, man.
Bye.
All right. In-house tonight, I see, the usual suspects, the Dynamexes, the Barney Beagles, Kevin Clow, Antho Chris, a new format, Donald Ray Link. God bless you too, Sheila W. Moanon. Hey, good to see you here this evening. That being said, well, let's just hit it, shall we? And of course, it's been a long time since I forgot to hit the old share button. Hey, even the best of us make a few rookie mistakes every now and again. Hey, anyway, good to have you aboard here tonight. If you are joining on the DLive platform, as always, we are still up on a couple other platforms. We are over on old Vaughn Live, Trovo Live. We are over on, the old Foxhole app, pilled.net, if you will. And of course, we are still up, I believe, over on the Tiger Network. Good to have you aboard if you're joining from over there. And of course, not to be forgotten, the old Roku for the handful of folks who are still able to get that platform as well. So tonight, like I said, more of the same. I think this will mark probably about the 30th episode where I have dug into the old COVID business here in the last year and a half or so. The last one, YouTube, I alluded to last week. YouTube did not take too kindly to talking about all the adverse effects, apparently citing stuff off of H&HS's website, the VAERS stuff. No, you can't show that. But hey, guess what? Give it about another year and we'll be proven right yet again. It just takes a while. They'll catch on eventually. So tonight, like I said, that's what we're going to hit here. And let me start things off with a little bit of a softball, I guess, if nothing else. One out of Zero Hedge, brought to us by the old Ron Paul Institute here today, says life insurance in COVID-19, something doesn't make sense. And of course, if you've paid any attention at all over the last 6-8 months or so since these vaxes and that have rolled out, I'm sure you've heard the stories about whether or not, these may void your life insurance policy, things of that nature. Well, this is what Ron Paul Institute's got to say. It says, you would think that during the worst pandemic since the 1918 Spanish flu, life insurance companies would be hedging their bets to avoid major losses from COVID-19. Now, I haven't written a life policy for several years, so I was wondering what was going on. I called and asked one of the brokers I deal with that interacts with hundreds of big life insurers to get an inside look into how the COVID crisis has changed their business. Imagine my surprise when she said it was pretty much business as usual. Huh? Well, last year, when the hysteria was just getting ramped up, she did say the companies temporarily tightened up underwriting and reduced the amount of coverage they would offer. But as time went by and the hard data came rolling in, those same companies went back to business as usual. I asked her specifically if life insurers wanted a COVID test as part of the underwriting process, and she said none that she was aware of. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? The most lethal pandemic in decades descends on the globe, with deadly mutations taking millions of innocent lives, and the life insurance companies couldn't care less? I also asked if the cost per thousand of coverage increased due to COVID, and again, she said no. Rates were pretty much the same as they were before the COVID pandemic ravaged the earth. Life insurance companies are very risk averse. They don't like losing money to unnecessary claims. The fact they're treating COVID as a non-event should be an indicator that something is very wrong with the whole narrative. Yeah, definitely something wrong with the whole narrative. Is it perhaps because we're dealing with something that you have, about a 99.997% chance of surviving? Is it possibly that? Is it possibly that, these vaccines probably are really not all that necessary? Though I would hardly believe that to be the case, right? Or is it by chance that you could probably, solve your issues with high-dose vitamin C, vitamin D, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, a Z-Pak, zinc, azithromycin, things of that nature, or just plain knowing how to take care of your health on your own? There's that possibility. It's interesting, isn't it, that the old life insurance policies wouldn't change. You would think that by now, they probably have to pay a little more, I would think, right? Well, Let's get into the whole Wuhan shenanigans here. The story that has since unraveled. Obviously, last week on the broadcast, if you're here, we talked a little bit about Bill Gates, and it looks like things are spiraling downward for him. Obviously, we saw the case with his marriage being dissolved, all the nefariousness behind the scenes, and then, of course, Dr. Fauci also kind of being laid to waste here as of late. And of course, Rand Paul certainly at the tip of the spear on some of that. But that didn't age well. Wuhan propaganda from MSM laid bare. And there's a pretty good thread in here we're going to cover here tonight. It says for nearly 18 months, the mainstream media engaged in journalistic malpractice, quashing any suggestion that COVID-19 could have originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, because their arch nemesis, former President Trump, dared promote this very logical conclusion. Let's also not forget the deep ties Beijing has formed within the United States, which include universities, entertainment, sports leagues, and of course, DC and its liberal surrogates. Remember, invasion, not what? What was the term? You guys remember, right? So, of course, once the lab leak theory began to circulate in January 2020, China's investments in the United States paid off, and the entire liberal media industrial complex furiously peddled the natural origin theory while boldly proclaiming the lab origin hypothesis a debunked conspiracy theory. Or was it? And there, of course, dating back to February 3rd of 2020, Twitter banned Zero Hedge after a post-coronavirus conspiracy theory. Tip of the spear, folks, barely a month in. When did we see the first articles of this trip out? Wasn't it right around the time that old Nancy Pelosi walked over the old impeachment stuff from the House that she delayed over to the Senate to begin the impeachment process? And then lo and behold, we had our very first case up in Washington right around that very same time. Interesting. That was until the last 2 weeks, starting with Senator Rand Paul shredding Anthony Fauci over the NIH funding U.S. research within the Wuhan lab, followed by a Wall Street Journal report that 3 WIV lab workers were hospitalized in December 2019 with COVID-19 symptoms. And I'll pause right there because I think even the folks over in China, believe it or not, have tried to debunk the Wall Street Journal story, saying, no, there were no 3 lab workers who disappeared, got sick, or any of that. So who knows which side of the coin to really believe, who is shedding more propaganda and disinformation at this point. And with that, the lab leak hypothesis was legitimized almost overnight, sending liberal outlets scrambling to quietly append their previous reporting. And I think we've seen cases of Vox and a number of these outlets that actually go back and edit their previous articles, thinking that we wouldn't catch on because, hey, there isn't this thing called archive.is or Wayback Machine. Freaking idiots. This flood of hypocrisy was compiled into an epic Twitter thread by journalist Drew Holden. So that's what we're going to cover here. Starting off with this one on the 25th. That the COVID pandemic could have leaked from a lab in Wuhan went from terrible, racist conspiracy theory to plausible overnight for the mainstream media without a shred of accountability. If you don't believe me, look at these stories side by side, then versus now. So you may remember that much of the really bad coverage was focused on at Senator Tom Cotton's suggestion that we better understand the potential for a lab leak from Wuhan. The difference in framing here from the New York Times between May 2020 and May 2021 is stark. So back then, we had Senator Tom Cotton repeats fringe theory of coronavirus origins out of the New York Times. Oh, flash forward a year. Oh, another group of scientists calls for further inquiry into origins of the coronavirus. Well, thank you to the paper of a public record, right? Fake news, New York Times. Holden continues, says, but it wasn't just the New York Times. There's a lot of ammo from CNN, too. Not even 2 months ago, they ran a piece writing off the lab leak theory as like something out of a comic book. Yesterday, the tone had changed without any reference to their own role in the previous debate. So the previous article, Oh, lab leak, COVID-19 theory is like something out of a comic book, virologist says. And I think that one dates back to, March 31st of this year, so barely 2 months ago. Now, new information on Wuhan researchers' illness furthers debate on pandemic origins. Right on, CNN. But if you go back further, at CNN's coverage gets even worse. Early in 2020, they ran CCP talking points suggesting it was all a political tactic based on disinformation. A little over a year later, CNN is asking the same questions President Trump and his team were panned for. Oh, we urge the U.S. to stop spreading disinformation. This according to CNN's tweet back then. China says recent accusations of the Trump administration that the COVID-19 pandemic originated in a lab in Wuhan are a political strategy for Republicans ahead of the 2020 presidential election. Oh, and now new information on Wuhan researchers' illness furthers debate on pandemic origins. So there you have it out of CNN. And continuing on, Chris Cillizza has been a key voice for at CNN on this. In February 2020, he cited a CNN fact checker who concluded you can say that didn't happen about the lab leak. Yesterday, he seemed baffled that Dr. Fauci wasn't entirely on his side anymore. So much for trust the science. Of course, there's the headlines. Tom Cotton is playing a dangerous game with his coronavirus speculation. Why is Anthony Fauci hedging on the origins of the coronavirus? So much for the cheerleading, right? I can't say this enough. In early 2020, at Washington Post accused that Senator Tom Cotton of fanning the embers of a conspiracy theory repeatedly debunked by experts for asking the same questions the Post reporting is currently asking. So back then, Tom Cotton keeps repeating a coronavirus conspiracy theory, etc. And now the Washington Post comes back with the vaccine lab leak. Good old compost. Drew Holden continues, says, and for some reason, the Washington Post timeline of events just so happens to omit their own fact check of the lab leak theory from April 2020 that concluded the balance of the scientific evidence strongly suggests the conclusion that the new coronavirus emerged from nature. Fact checker, was the new coronavirus accidentally released from a Wuhan lab? It's doubtful. And now, timeline, how the Wuhan lab leak theory suddenly became credible. I guess, after all that time has elapsed, we're just supposed to, thank you, Washington Post, for correcting your mistake. Oh, you're now credible again, and we'll find favor with you and put you back in our reading list, right? Nah, kick you to the curb. Drew Holden out of Politico says had a quicker about face than most. While they decried that the Wuhan lab was at the center of conspiracy theories about the pandemic's origin, in March 2021, they resurfaced worries about risky coronavirus experiments from 2018. Wonder why no one listened. And out of Politico back then, it says the Trump administration abruptly cut off funding for a project studying how coronaviruses spread from bats to people after reports linked the work to a lab in Wuhan, China, at the center of conspiracy theories about the pandemic's origins. And now, diplomats in 2018 warned of risky coronavirus experiments in a Wuhan lab. No one listened. I wonder why. And much of the problem originally was that so many outlets relied on less than trustworthy sources, like the lab itself, to reject the lab leak theory and render it a conspiracy theory. Even Reuters, who doesn't usually make the threads, did this. It was unbelievably pervasive. Out of Reuters back then, dating back to April 28th of last year, China lab rejects COVID conspiracy claims, but the origin's still a mystery. Wuhan lab staff sought hospital care before COVID-19 outbreak, disclosed Wall Street Journal. And of course, who can also forget the fact that Facebook had their own set of fact checkers who were embedded in the Wuhan lab. There's that too. I don't know how else to put it. At NPR was awful about this one. In April 2020, the story was scientists debunk lab accident theory, but in March 2021, the idea suddenly takes on new life. Did anyone consider who killed the original theory? I have an idea. And here NPR states, back on April 22nd of last year, scientists debunk lab accident theory of pandemic emergence. And now, theory that COVID came from a Chinese lab takes on new life in wake of WHO report. Well, thank you for that, NPR. Not even credible anymore. I've talked often about how the media has an enormous power in shaping narratives through framing. Here's an example from The Hill. Trump is portrayed as acting in bad faith, efforts to blame China for the virus, and then that framing gets jettisoned when no longer necessary. So The Hill back then says, even as the World Health Organization and others say they've seen no evidence linking coronavirus to being created in a Chinese lab, President Trump is doubling down on his efforts to blame China for the virus. And now, COVID-19 Wuhan theory gains more credibility. And you lost credibility, The Hill. You have any subscribers left? You shouldn't. For BBC News, the lab leak theory went from a conspiracy theory on par with China's suggestion that the U.S. created the virus to all hypotheses are on the table, without an ounce of self-awareness. And rarely do they. Do they have any self-awareness? God, no. It's all about money, not views. Coronavirus, U.S. and China trade conspiracy theories. That was the headline back then. And now, coronavirus. More work needed to rule out China lab leak theory, says who? I don't know which is less believable. The World Health Organization, BBC, all of them combined. I don't know. Again, why did no one at Business Insider stop to consider whether the director of the lab that had just been accused by the leader of the free world of starting a once-in-a-century plague might not be telling the entire truth? Seems something changed since. And of course, out of Business Insider. Back then, the theory pushed by Trump that the coronavirus began at a laboratory in Wuhan is pure fabrication, according to the lab's director. And now, 3 Wuhan lab workers were sick enough to go to the hospital in November 2019, report says, bolstering calls to reconsider the coronavirus lab leak theory. Unfortunately, there's a lot of work to do with Business Insider. I couldn't help but include these 2 pieces that haven't exactly aged perfectly. And Business Insider said back on May of last year, a fringe theory suggests the coronavirus could have leaked from a lab at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, but there's no evidence of this. Here's why an accidental lab leak is extremely unlikely. And now, Trump cut funding for a group researching bat-to-human virus transmission after unfounded conspiracy theories linked it to a Wuhan lab, report says. Again, Business Insider, does anybody still subscribe to them? And if you do, why? Drew Holden continues, says the extent to which the mainstream media trusted the lab in Wuhan at their word is jarring. That Fortune magazine was just one of many, but it's also impossible to ignore, both here and in general, that the contrast is always between Wuhan and President Trump. More on that later. And Fortune had this to say, Wuhan lab denies link to virus outbreak after Trump fans speculation that China may be knowingly responsible. And now, why the Wuhan lab leak theory is getting a second look. Continuing on, Holden says the worst part of all this, except for the damage to public trust, of course, is the absolute lack of accountability. The media today blew it on this story in ways that could make it less likely that we ever get to the bottom of this without offering so much as an apology. Meanwhile, the supercut. Well, here we get Tom Elliott, media mock Trump, Tom Cotton for debunk COVID leak theory. And hang on, I may not have shared. Bear with me 1 second here. All right, let's try this. Oop, what the heck? One more time. There we go.
The best evidence suggests that the kind of bat from which this virus jumped to humans wasn't even present there.
But you know the worst of all, whether it came from the lab or came from the bats it all came from China.
Because we don't know where the novel coronavirus came from yet, the conspiracy theories fill the void.
I'm telling you, the Chi-Coms are trying to weaponize this thing.
Conservative talk show host Rush Limbaugh with zero proof suggesting a Chinese bioweapon lab is to blame.
This question about the Wuhan lab, we know that it's been debunked. Those same agencies now have been tapped with investigating one of Trump world's most favorite conspiracy theories.
This week, Donald Trump is still pushing the debunked bunkum, despite his own intelligence community's findings that is simply not true.
And there is simply no reason to believe that is the case. There is no empirical evidence to verify that.
Coming up with a conspiracy theory to try and foment xenophobia with respect to the Chinese has just as much factual support as taking Clorox.
He can't just sit back and let the doctors and the scientists do their jobs. He's got to chime in.
He may pick up the conspiracy theory that this was some weapon.
People don't keep bats in captivity. Complete baloney.
We don't need to invoke conspiracy theories.
This is just another example of the president trying to change the narrative from his own failings.
The problem for President Trump is that he's running for re-election, is looking for ways to deflect blame for the performance of the administration.
If you look at the evolution of the virus in bats, and what's out there now is very, very strongly leaning towards this could not have been artificially or deliberately manipulated.
So I wanted to ask, are you still confident that it developed naturally?
No, actually, that's the point that I said. No, I'm not convinced about that. I think that we should continue to investigate what went on in China.
Grabian, the multimedia marketplace.
So there you have it, a little bit of a cut up in that. Thanks to Tom Elliott for putting that together. Some of that stuff did not age so well. Expect no apologies, of course. Dr. Lee Mengyan says that Zero Hedge is one of the few real media which is brave and pursues the truth of COVID-19 from the beginning of the pandemic. As mine, their account was censored and suspended by Twitter. Same thing also happened to that Tucker Carlson by Facebook. Their efforts deserve to be appreciated. And of course, Zero Hedge just says Facebook stops removing claims. COVID-19 was man-made Politico. And there you have it. So again, since this thing has kicked off, I don't know how many articles I've come across at this point, 6, 7, 8,000. I don't know. I've got it all. One of these days, I'll get time enough to put it all in one spot and kick it out there, much like I did with the election stuff. And then you guys can use it as you see fit. But nonetheless, that's the Mockingbird Media for you. Get your friends off it as much as possible. Now, this article is the one I really want to hit here. I don't know how far I'll get into it here this evening. I don't know of a bigger story in the world right now than ivermectin, New York Times best-selling author. And of course, this stems a lot from what has been going on in India, if it is to be believed at all, of all the variants and everything else and shenanigans that we've heard in the media over the last couple, 2-3 weeks. And so, obviously, ivermectin is one of those things that can be used to knock the virus out, as we have found. And let's get into it. It says, authored by Nick Corbishley via nakedcapitalism.com. So why are journalists not covering it? Michael Capuzzo, a New York Times bestselling author, has just published an article titled "The Drug That Cracked COVID." The 15-page article chronicles the gargantuan struggle being waged by frontline doctors on all continents to get ivermectin approved as a COVID-19 treatment, as well as the tireless efforts by reporters, media outlets, and social media companies to thwart them. Because, after what I just showed you, they are to be believed, right? I mean, it only takes them a year of shenanigans and obfuscating the truth before they finally come around and unapologetically don't offer any sort of apologies for their mistakes, nor will they. And because of ivermectin, Capuzzo says there are hundreds of thousands, actually millions of people around the world, from Uttar Pradesh in India to Peru to Brazil, who are living and not dying. Yet media outlets have done all they can to quote-unquote debunk the notion that ivermectin may serve as an effective, easily accessible, and affordable treatment for COVID-19. They have parroted the arguments laid out by health regulators around the world that there just isn't enough evidence to justify its use. Think about that last statement. Isn't enough evidence to justify its use. Well, you know why that is, right? At the end of the day, not including the ABCs, NBCs, CBSs, and all the commercials you see pushed by Big Pharma. How many of these other outlets and that we just got done speaking of, the NPRs, the BBCs, the CNNs, etc., how many of those do you suppose are backed by Big Pharma as well? And if ivermectin is a relatively cheap drug, who is not making profits? Big Pharma. So they might have a little bit of a financial incentive, don't you think? And so for his part, Capuzzo, as a reporter, saw with his own eyes the other side of the story that has gone unreported of the many patients in the U.S. whose lives have been saved by ivermectin, and of 5 of the doctors that have led the battle to save lives around the world: Paul Merrick, Umberto Meduri, Jose Iglesias, Pierre Corey, and Joe Veron. These are all highly decorated doctors. Through their leadership of the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care, FLCCC Alliance, they have already enhanced our treatment of COVID-19 by discovering and promoting the use of corticoid steroids against the virus. But their calls for ivermectin to also be used have met with a wall of resistance from healthcare regulators and a wall of silence from media outlets. And again, citing what I just spoke of, right? I really wish the world could see both sides, Capuzzo laments. But unfortunately, most reporters are not interested in telling the other side of the story. Even if they were, their publishers would probably refuse to publish it. And that does kind of remind me of a story dating back to the days of Fox News when Roger Ailes and company were still at the helm. You know, talking about Megyn Kelly, and back in that day, you know, the argument was, and I think this came out in a story you guys may remember from several years ago, that the reason that they can't put those sorts of opinions on air is because of the fact that they are funded by Big Pharma. They would lose 70% of the revenue if they were to show that stuff, right? And that may explain why Capuzzo, a 6-time Pulitzer-nominated journalist, best known for his New York Times best-selling nonfiction books Close to Shore and Murder Room, ended up publishing his article on ivermectin in Mountain Home, a monthly local magazine for the off the Pennsylvania mountains and the New York Finger Lakes region, of which Capuzzo's wife is the editor. So there's the cover story. I'll show you that here in a minute. Says it's also the reason why I decided to dedicate today's post to Capuzzo's article. Put simply, as many people as possible, particularly journalists, need to read this story. As Capuzzo himself says, I don't know of a bigger story in the world. And of course, there's a total news blackout. On December 8th, 2020, FLCCC member Dr. Pierre Corey gave 9 minutes of impassioned testimony to the U.S. Homeland Security Committee meeting on the potent antiviral and anti-inflammatory benefits of ivermectin. A total of 9 million people, myself included, saw the video on YouTube before it was taken down by YouTube's owner, Google. As Capuzzo exhaustively lays out, both traditional and social media have gone to extraordinary lengths to keep people in the dark about ivermectin. So effective has this been that even in some of the countries that have benefited most from its use, such as Mexico and Argentina, many people are completely unaware of its existence. And this is no surprise given how little information is actually seeping out in the public arena. A news blackout by the world's leading media came down on ivermectin like an iron curtain. Reporters who trumpeted the COVID-19 terror in India and Brazil didn't report that ivermectin was crushing the P1 variant in the Brazilian rainforest and killing COVID-19 and all variants in India. Think about that, folks. The latest variant supposedly strike more fear, right? Do you honestly believe, after all the shenanigans with Gavi, with the Gates Foundations, the Supreme Court and that ruling against Gates and company because of their botched HPV vaccines that rendered women sterile, that they were going to bow and yield to Big Pharma at this point? Give me a break. That ivermectin was saving tens of thousands of lives in South America wasn't news, but mocking the continent's peasants for taking horse paste was. Journalists denied the world knowledge of the most effective life-saving therapies in the pandemic. Corey said, especially among the elderly, people of color, and the poor, while wringing their hands at the tragedy of their disparate rates of death. 3 days after Corey's testimony, an Associated Press fact-check reporter, quote unquote, interviewed Corey for 20 minutes, in which I recounted all the existing trials, evidence, over 15 randomized and multiple observational trials, all showing dramatic benefits of ivermectin, he said. Then she wrote, AP's assessment, false. There's no evidence ivermectin has been proven a safe or effective treatment against COVID-19. Think about that. That's AP writing that. What were the headlines in that we just got done reading back then versus now? Is AP to be trusted? Are they up there with the Reuters, the CNNs, and everybody else? Oh, you betcha. Like many critics, she didn't explore the ivermectin data or evidence in any detail, but merely dismissed its insufficient evidence. Kind of sounds like the whole election, right? Dismissed the evidence, insufficient evidence. There was no evidence. They got that quoting down. Quoting instead the lack of a recommendation by the NIH or WHO to describe the real evidence in any detail would put the AP and public health agencies in the difficult position of explaining how the lives of thousands of poor people in developing countries don't count in these matters. Think about that. Their lives don't count. How well does that play into their agenda? Like the Cuomo's sending folks back into the old folks' homes and that to die, right? Not just in media, but in social media. Ivermectin has inspired a strange new form of Western and pharmaceutical imperialism. On January 12, 2021, the Brazilian Ministry of Health tweeted to its 1.2 million followers not to wait with COVID-19 until it's too late, but go to a health unit and request early treatment, only to have Twitter take down the official public health pronouncement of the sovereign fifth largest nation in the world for, quote, spreading misleading and potentially harmful information. Twitter telling the Ministry of Health of Brazil, who knows probably health better than Twitter does, that they are spreading medical misinformation. Twitter. Early treatment is code for ivermectin. On January 31st, the Slovak Ministry of Health announced its decision on Facebook to allow use of ivermectin, causing Facebook to take down that post and remove the entire page it was on. The Ivermectin for MDs team with 10,200 members from more than 100 countries. Now we got Facebook. And of course, I just told you my story with YouTube doing the very same thing, talking about adverse effects. Who are these folks? YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Who are they to give medical advice and determine what is or is not acceptable? Why are we still on their frickin' platforms? In Argentina, Professor and Dr. Hector Carvalho, whose prophylactic studies are renowned by other researchers, says all the scientific documentation for ivermectin is quickly scrubbed from the internet. I am afraid, he wrote to Merrick and his colleagues, we have affected the most sensitive organ on humans, the wallet. As Corey's testimony was climbing toward 9 million views, YouTube, owned by Google, erased his official Senate testimony, saying it endangered the community. Corey's biggest voice was silenced. The most powerful entities on Earth. Malcolm X once called the media the most powerful entity on the earth. They have, he said, the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent. And that's power because they control the minds of masses. Today, that power is now infused the power of the world's biggest tech and social media companies. Together, social and traditional media have the power to make a medicine that has saved possibly millions of lives during the current pandemic disappear from the conversation. When it is covered, it's almost always in a negative light. Some media organizations, including the New York Times, have even prefaced mention of the word ivermectin, a medicine that has done so much good over its 40-year lifespan that its creators were awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2015 with the word controversial. Undeterred, many frontline doctors have tried to persuade their respective health regulators of the unparalleled efficacy and safety of ivermectin as a COVID treatment. They include Dr. Tess Lowry, a prominent independent medical researcher who, as Capuzzo reports, evaluates the safety and efficacy of drugs for the World Health Organization and the National Health Service to set international clinical practice guidelines. She read all 27 of the ivermectin studies Corey cited. The resulting evidence is consistent and unequivocal, she announced, and sent a rapid meta-analysis, an epidemiological statistical multi-study review considered the highest form of medical evidence to the director of the NHS, members of parliament, in a video to Prime Minister Bojo with the good news that we now have solid evidence of an effective treatment for COVID-19. And ivermectin should immediately be adopted globally and systematically for the prevention and treatment of COVID-19. Ignored by British leaders and media, Lowry convened the day-long streaming BIRD conference, the British Ivermectin Recommendation Development, with more than 60 researchers and doctors from the US, Canada, Mexico, England, Ireland, Belgium, Argentina, South Africa, Botswana, Nigeria, Australia, and Japan. They evaluated the drug using the full evidence to decision framework, that is the gold standard tool for developing clinical practice guidelines used by the World Health Organization, and reached the conclusion that ivermectin should blanket the world. Most of all, you can trust me because I am also a medical doctor, first and foremost, Lowry told the Prime Minister, with a moral duty to help people, to do no harm, and to save lives. Please, may we start saving lives now? She heard nothing back. Ivermectin's benefits were also corroborated by Dr. Andrew Hill, a renowned University of Liverpool pharmacologist and independent medical researcher, and the senior World Health Organization UNITAID investigator of potential treatments for COVID-19. Hill's team of 23 researchers in 23 countries had reported that after 9 months of looking for a COVID-19 treatment and finding nothing but failures like remdesivir, we kissed a lot of frogs. Ivermectin was the only thing that worked against COVID-19, and its safety and efficacy were astonishing, blindingly positive, Hill said, and transformative. Ivermectin, the World Health Organization researcher concluded, reduced COVID-19 mortality by 81%. Why all the foot dragging? Yet, most health regulators and governments continue to drag their feet. More evidence is needed, they say. All the while, doctors in most countries around the world have no early outpatient medicines to draw upon in their struggle against the quote-unquote, I'll use quotes here because that's what it should be, worst pandemic in a century. Drawing on his own experience, Capuzzo describes the absence of treatments for COVID-19 as a global crisis. Yeah, we have to play with these experimental quote-unquote vaccines, gene therapies, mRNA therapies, designer crap. When my daughter Grace, a vice president of a New York advertising agency, came down with COVID-19 recently, she was quarantined in a COVID hotel in Times Square with homeless people and quarantining travelers. The locks on her room were removed. Nurses prowled the halls to keep her in her room and wake her up every night to check her vitals, not to treat her, because there is no approved treatment for COVID-19. Only if her oxygen plummeted to move her to the hospital, where there is only a single elective approved treatment for COVID-19, steroids that may keep the lungs from failing. There are 3 possible explanations for health regulators' refusal to allow the use of a highly promising, well-tolerated, off-label medicine such as ivermectin. 1. As a generic, ivermectin is cheap and widely available, which means there would be a lot less money to be made by Big Pharma if it became the go-to early-stage treatment against COVID. Other pharmaceutical companies are developing their own novel treatments for COVID-19, which would have to compete directly with ivermectin. They include ivermectin's original manufacturer, Merck, which has an antiviral compound, molnupiravir. There we go, mouthful. In phase 3 clinical trials for COVID-19. That might explain the company's recent statement claiming that there is no scientific basis whatsoever for a potential therapeutic effect of ivermectin against COVID-19. And if approved as a COVID-19 treatment, ivermectin could even threaten the emergency use authorization granted to COVID-19 vaccines. Aha, there's the rub. One of the basic conditions for the emergency use authorization granted to the vaccines currently being used against COVID is that there are no alternative treatments available for the disease. As such, if ivermectin or some other promising medicine such as fluvoxamine were approved as an effective early treatment for COVID-19, the vaccines could be stripped of authorization. That'd be a terrible thing, wouldn't it? You know, the fact that Big Pharma plans to make about $50 billion in profits by the year 2025, that might just add a small little wrinkle to their profit margin, wouldn't it? Too bad. This may explain why affordable, readily available, and minimally toxic drugs are not repurposed for use against COVID despite the growing mountains of evidence supporting their efficacy. Ivermectin has already been approved as a COVID-19 treatment in more than 20 countries. They include Mexico, where the mayor of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum, recently said that the medicine had reduced hospitalizations by as much as 76%. As of last week, 135,000 of the city's residents had been treated with the medicine. The government of India, the world's second most populous country and one of the world's biggest manufacturer of medicines, has also recommended the use of ivermectin as an early outpatient treatment against COVID-19, in direct contravention of World Health Organization's own advice. Dr. Vikas P. Sukumat, the dean of Emory School of Medicine, recently wrote in a column for the Times of India that deploying drugs such as ivermectin and fluvoxamine in India is likely to rapidly reduce the number of COVID-19 patients, reduce the number requiring hospitalization, supplemental oxygen and intensive care, and improve outcomes in hospitalized patients. 4 weeks after the government included ivermectin and budesonide amongst its early treatment guidelines, the country has recorded its lowest case count in 40 days. And here we see the uptick in that supposedly started here, mid to late March with the great uptick, and now it has been rapidly declining. It says in many of India's regions, the case numbers are plunging in almost vertical fashion. In the capital, Delhi, as in Mexico City, hospitalizations have plummeted in the space of 10 days. ICU occupancy fell from 99% to 70%. Deaths are also falling. The test positivity ratio slumped from 35% to 5% in just 1 month. One of the outliers of this trend is the state of Tamil Nadu, where cases are still rising steeply. This may have something to do with the fact that the state's newly elected governor, M.K. Stalin, what a nice name there, decided to exclude ivermectin from the region's treatment protocol in favor of remdesivir. The result, soaring cases. Late last week, Stalin reversed course once again and readopted ivermectin. For the moment, deaths in India remain extremely high, and there are concerns that the numbers are being underreported. Yet, they may also begin to fall in the coming days. In all the countries that have used ivermectin widely, fatalities are the last thing to fall, after case numbers and hospitalizations. Of course, there's no way of definitively proving that these rapid fall-offs are due to the use of ivermectin. Correlation, even as consistent as this, is not causation. Other factors, such as strict lockdowns and travel restrictions, no doubt also play a part. But a clear pattern across nations and territories is formed that strongly supports ivermectin's purported efficacy. And that efficacy has been amply demonstrated in 3 meta-analyses. India's decision to adopt ivermectin, including as a prophylaxis in some states, is already a potential game changer. As I wrote 3 weeks ago, if case numbers, hospitalizations, and fatalities fall in India as precipitously as they have in other countries that have adopted ivermectin, it could even become a watershed moment. But for that to happen, the news must reach enough eyes and ears. And for that to happen, reporters must, as Capuzzo says, begin to do their job and report both sides of this vital story. And so far, that has captured about 206,000 eyeballs, at least on Zero Hedge, which leads me to the actual article on that this guy penned. Again, here is the magazine article out of Mountain Home, Pennsylvania and the New York Finger Lakes, the drug that cracked COVID right here. This is the May 2021 edition here. And let's see here. How much time do I have? I might be able to get through a couple paragraphs here before the end. Let's see. Blow this up just a little bit so you guys can read it. Again, this thing's about 15 pages. I'll drop the link out there so you guys can take a read through it as well. Keep that in your arsenal of stuff to share with folks. When my daughter Grace, a vice president at a New York advertising agency, came down with COVID-19 recently, she was quarantined in a COVID hotel in Times Square with homeless people and quarantining travelers. The locks on her room door were removed. Nurses prowled the halls to keep her in her room and wake her up every night to check her vitals, not to treat her, because there is no approved treatment for COVID-19, only if her oxygen plummeted to move her to the hospital, where there is only a single effective approved treatment for COVID-19, steroids that may keep the lungs from failing. The absence of treatment for COVID-19 is a global crisis, Dr. Francis Collins, director of the National Institute of Health, said recently on 60 Minutes. For vaccines are not enough. Dangerous variants sweep the globe after mutating in the world's poor and unvaccinated. Lockdowns persist and millions more are likely to die. The wondrous mRNA vaccines need a cop buddy. Fortunately, I know of an elderly treatment for Grace. It's a cheap, generic drug, safer than Tylenol, FDA approved to treat scabies and lice in children and the elderly, with many other uses that make ivermectin a wonder drug. In 55 clinical trials with 445 scientists and 17,730 patients around the world, ivermectin has been shown to be the most powerful drug to eradicate COVID-19 in all stages of the disease, including prevention and early treatment. It's what the world desperately needs now, according to Dr. Pierre Corey, a former professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Medical School, whose research group, the nonprofit Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance, has developed the most effective non-vaccine treatments in the world from safe, FDA-approved generics. They have saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, including 80-year-old Judy Smetkowitz of Buffalo, the star of this month's cover story. Judy's remarkable story is a miracle, her family says, thanks to Pierre Corey, science, and God. Grace researched ivermectin and was surprised that it is not FDA approved as an antiviral to treat COVID-19, although it is FDA approved as an antiparasitic agent. This would be an off-label use, a routine thing in medicine, comprising some 20% of all prescriptions. Aspirin to prevent heart attack or stroke, for instance, is off-label. This is called doctoring, and it was routine until COVID-19, when a big pharma-dominated health system tried to eliminate all generic competition to protect its biggest payday of all time. Judy had the choice to fight back or die, a worldwide revolution that will determine the future of medicine and who lives and dies from COVID-19. The battle of ivermectin is fighting back, fighting for life. Grace, I'm happy to say, was prescribed ivermectin and got better fast. If you're interested in ivermectin, check out flccc.net and talk to your doctor. Here's a help page on how to talk to your doctor. And you can go to www.covid19criticalcare.com, guideline for this website. You guys can find that all in the link. I'll drop it again here momentarily. Says I got onto the story on Mother's Day 2020 when my wife Teresa, who many know as the publisher and editor of Mountain Home, and I watched Dr. Corey testify to the U.S. Senate about his group's first breakthrough, a steroid treatment that was saving 95% of COVID-19 patients when 80% were dying in New York City, and the world was in panic. To our surprise, a longtime journalist we met at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Dr. Corey, was canceled by a global news blackout. Was not a treatment that could save the world news? While Teresa put out the magazine, I've written 2 New York Times best-selling books, Close to Shore and The Murder Room, featuring some of the world's most brilliant scientists. I've spent months interviewing Corey and his colleagues, and I've seen unthinkable things. When Professor Joe Veron, a top critical care doctor and Mexican-American hero, recently honored with Joseph Veron Day in Houston for his COVID-19 treatments that are saving the city's sickest poor, Black, Mexican, and immigrants, invited journalists from CNN, the Associated Press, and Reuters to his COVID-19 ICU to get out the news of his life-saving treatment. All the journalists fictionalized the story to make it seem like most everyone was dying, when in fact most everyone was living. The happy story, the truth, didn't fit the official government science. We live in a remarkable media age where a positive story on CNN, perhaps more so than a peer review in the New York England Journal of Medicine, will instantly encourage doctors in 200 countries to use a perfectly safe and legal drug and save humanity. I call on my fellow colleagues, including former colleagues and friends at the Washington Post and the New York Times, to open their hearts and minds to legitimate, unreported doctors and therapies and write about all sides of the ivermectin story, like journalists always have. It is a historic opportunity. For the first time in the long journey from Gutenberg to Google, journalists may be the ones to save the world. Well, I don't know if I put as much faith and stock in the New York Times and Washington Post, given what we read just previous this, but nonetheless, again, here's the 15 pages net you guys can scroll through, take a look at, use for your own research. Let other people know that there are alternatives to the jab that are out there and should, in my opinion, be widely adopted. And again, if you need help trying to find where to locate ivermectin, follow the links within the story. So there you have it, folks. In a nutshell, some of the shenanigans going on around ivermectin, of course, our Mockingbird media and everything else. That being said, that was a short hour. I see that old Salty Crystal and Maga Swagga is in house.
Hey, what's
yes,
up?
We are, and Sleepwalker as well. Come on!
I'm actually
the party's all here.
Look at that.
Sleepwalker.
I'm excited. I'm excited. What's up, Breaking?
Hey, how are things in Iowa this evening?
Oh, great! That is some serious journalism right there.
I'm just chilling and sitting around.
Thank you. Thank you, Breaking.
That's all I needed to hear. Things are well and sitting around.
He's like, that's all I needed to hear.
Ivermectin, baby, for the win.
That's right. Spread the word, folks.
For
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you guys got in store this evening?
Craziness.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well,
like what we regularly do.
So funny. We're all over, man. There's no format. Whatever happens, happens.
Very true.
That's right.
Go Beans.
We're just buckled up. That's all. Along for the ride.
Sounds good. I'll be out in chat. Take care. We'll see you guys.
All right.
Have a good night, Breaking.
Maga Swagga.
It does go to be a fast hour, doesn't it?
All right, let's do this. I'm going to do this.
Right.
I'm going to do this, right?
Yeah.
Let's do it, baby.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Get ready. Get ready. It's going to happen, folks. Go, Power Rangers. It's true. The rat.
It's Raducci.
Oh, God. Just turned 18.